Pepe Papacosta is doing some very innovative excavations. She's finding lots of artifacts from the time of Alexander the Great. It's pretty exciting.
For 2 millennia, Alexander's resting place was dismissed as myth. His tomb buried beneath layers of a city that kept building over its own past. But then, deep under the streets of modern Alexandria, a massive sarcophagus was found.
There you go, yeah.
It fits.
That's it.
That is it.
Absolutely.
Oh my God.
And when scientists cracked it open, what they saw wasn't just strange, it was deeply unsettling. Was this the end of the mystery, or the beginning of something far more disturbing? One hidden detail is now raising a question the world might not be ready to face. Scientists finally opened Alexander the Great's tomb, and it's not good. The modern-day discovery. In early July of 2018, construction workers digging on Al-Karmeli Street in Alexandria hit something they didn't expect. They were working in the busy Sidi Gaber district, clearing out a trench, when their machine suddenly jammed against something harder than limestone. What they had struck was not rubble. It was the lid of a massive black granite coffin. This thing was no ordinary burial box. It was nearly 9 feet long, a little over 5 feet wide, about 6 feet tall, and weighed close to 30 short tons. It was found 16 feet below street level, sitting in land that once belonged to ancient Ptolemaic Alexandria. The moment local inspectors saw it, they stopped everything and called Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. Their measurements confirmed what everyone was hoping. It was the largest untouched sarcophagus ever found in the city. Almost immediately, headlines around the world exploded. People were asking if this was finally it. Had Alexander the Great's long-lost tomb been found? The theory made sense. A giant sealed coffin, right near where the royal quarter used to be, the area that once held Alexander's mausoleum. But archaeologists quickly warned not to get carried away. Alexandria's wet and shifting soil often moves things far from where they originally were buried. To keep the public calm and curious, Egyptian officials made a bold choice. They scheduled a public opening on July 19, 2018, and live-streamed the whole thing. When a crane finally lifted the stone lid, what came out first wasn't treasure. It was a wave of stink so strong it made some people gag. The smell came from centuries of groundwater and sewage that had leaked in. And inside the reddish-brown sludge, 3 skeletons began to appear, 2 men and 1 woman. There were no golden masks, no royal names carved into stone, no symbols of power, just bits of gold leaf, fragments of linen, and broken pottery. The bones raised more questions than answers. One of the men had a star-shaped fracture on his skull, like he'd been stabbed or shot with an arrow. The woman's skull had a hole from an old surgical procedure called trepanation, where part of the skull is cut open and the person actually survives. That kind of surgery is so rare in ancient Egypt that fewer than a dozen examples have ever been documented. The remains were quickly moved to the Alexandria National Museum, where scientists started scanning each skeleton using CT machines. The scans were published in 2024 in a journal led by the Smithsonian. They confirmed the injuries and revealed tiny growth rings in the victim's teeth. Those rings became the key to something even more important: chemical testing. That testing led to a breakthrough in May 2024 at a major archaeology conference hosted by the American Research Center in Egypt. A research team from the University of Alexandria presented strontium isotope results from the skeletons. These isotopes, which act like chemical fingerprints, were matched against a 7,500-year baseline of Nile Delta water, taken from lakebed samples nearby. All three results landed solidly within that local delta range. That meant none of the three people buried in the coffin had grown up in Macedonia, where Alexander came from. They had spent their childhoods in Egypt, and that pretty much killed the theory that Alexander was in the box. The bones belonged to locals, not royalty from the Greek highlands. Other lab results supported this too. Carbon dating showed the bones were from the late Ptolemaic or early Roman period, about 200 years after Alexander had died. Scientists didn't find any sign of the embalming materials typically used on royals. DNA analysis, which is still ongoing, suggests the two men might have been brothers, while the woman was not related, possibly a spouse. Even the little gold squares found in the coffin turned out not to be military decorations, but simple funeral charms that were mass-produced for ordinary burials. So why such a massive granite coffin for regular people? The answer might be in the details. Tool marks on the walls show that the original cavity had been widened to fit more than one body, likely reusing a high-end coffin at a lower cost. And the location gave another clue. The site sits right at the edge of an ancient cemetery that was turned into a residential area after the Second World War. Back in ancient times, that neighborhood was affordable for well-off merchants or Navy officers who could splurge on something grand, even if they weren't royalty. By the end of 2024, Egypt's Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities published its final report. The giant black coffin from Sidi Gabr was indeed a remarkable discovery, but it had no link to Alexander the Great. It likely held a wealthy local family, possibly with some military background, who lived and died sometime between 100 BC and 50 AD. That reddish, swampy liquid inside, not a curse or ancient elixir, just centuries of contaminated runoff. And the lid had stayed closed all this time simply because no one thought to loot a plain, unmarked grave buried under a parking lot. But the story didn't end there. This coffin, despite not being Alexander's, sparked global curiosity in a way no press release ever could. In the weeks after the live stream, online searches for Alexander's tomb hit a 10-year high. Egypt's archaeology department got a budget bump. Universities around the world, from Paris to Perth, started applying for permits to survey nearby areas with ground-penetrating radar. But if this wasn't Alexander's tomb, then where is his real resting place? To answer that, we have to go back over 2,000 years, to a time when his burial site was not only known, but visited by emperors. The disappearance of Alexander the Great's tomb. For almost 600 years after Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, anyone with enough political pull and the right escort could walk right into his tomb and look at the body of the man who once ruled everything from the Adriatic Sea to the Indus River. Early accounts say his body was first laid to rest in Memphis, the old capital of the pharaohs. But less than 40 years later, it was reburied in a marble-lined monument in the heart of a brand-new city, Alexandria. That move, which was completed before 290 BCE, shifted Alexander's public cult from Upper Egypt down to the coast. From then on, Alexandria wasn't just a city. It became a shrine, and every emperor who wanted legitimacy made sure it was on their list. We know from Roman sources that Alexander's tomb was a major stop. When Julius Caesar arrived in Egypt in 48 BCE, he reportedly broke down in tears when he saw Alexander's preserved face. And that was strange, because Caesar wasn't known for showing emotion. Augustus came 18 years later, right after defeating Antony and Cleopatra, and insisted on opening the coffin himself. But during the visit, he clumsily broke off the tip of Alexander's nose. Later, Emperor Caligula took the breastplate as a souvenir. Caracalla brought flowers. Septimius Severus, worried about damage, ordered the tomb sealed, but only the inner chamber. The outer hall stayed open for visitors. By the 3rd century, when the historian Dio Cassius finished writing Roman history, the tomb was still a must-see for anyone doing the imperial sightseeing route from the Red Sea to the Colosseum. Then suddenly, the records go silent. After the early 4th century, there's not a single surviving document. No letters, no travel journals, nothing that mentions seeing the tomb or the body. Archaeologists today believe that 4 things likely overlapped to cause this disappearance. First, nature struck hard. A long series of earthquakes hit the Nile Delta throughout the 4th century. The worst one hit on July 21st, in the year 365, just after dawn. It was triggered by a powerful offshore quake near Crete, likely around magnitude 8. The tsunami it created tore through Alexandria's harbor, smashed ships into buildings, destroyed warehouses, and drowned thousands of people. Sediment cores taken later show that the wave pushed marine sand nearly half a mile inland. The quakes didn't stop. For decades, aftershocks continued shaking the city. Columns fell, foundations cracked, and to make matters worse, the rising groundwater level was already weakening many of the older buildings. Then came religious change. In the year 391, Emperor Theodosius I banned all public pagan worship. Temples were stripped down for building materials or buried and forgotten. A once respected tomb now became a problem, too pagan, too out of step with the rising tide of Christian rule. And finally, there was simple construction. As the city rebuilt itself again and again, old ruins were leveled, new streets were laid, and more layers of soil and debris piled up. Today, downtown Alexandria sits over 16 feet above where the city was in ancient times. The older parts of the city are now sealed under centuries of rubble, storm deposits, and landfill, just like how a marsh buries a forest over time. Research from the University of Southern California has tracked this in detail. They identified 23 major earthquakes in Alexandria between the years 320 and 1303. In a February 2025 study, their team also found that the coastline has been shrinking at a rate of about 11.5 feet per year since the late 20th century. That's a big deal. As land sinks and the sea creeps in, entire neighborhoods are starting to buckle. In just the summer of 2025, Reuters reported that 4 apartment buildings along Alexandria's Corniche collapsed because of this. So what happens to a royal tomb under all of that? Basically, it gets hidden in plain sight. A team led by Egypt's Central Department of Antiquities and the Hellenic Research Institute has spent 3 digging seasons using synthetic aperture radar satellites and dragging ground-penetrating radar sleds through every open patch of land they can find. In March 2025, their report showed a series of rectangular voids buried below modern Alexandria, specifically between the city bus station on Nabi Daniel Street and a group of apartment blocks along Sharia al-Horeya. Most of the anomalies start about 20 feet below the surface, which matches the level where ancient streets used to run. But there's a problem. That entire area is now covered in asphalt, concrete, or private homes. No one can dig without tearing through someone's living room. This is what makes the tomb's disappearance so frustrating. The grave may still be there, damaged, flooded, looted, but no evidence shows it was ever fully removed. More likely, the city just built itself over it. Urban archaeologist Hélène de Sales who helped write the radar report, said it best at a symposium in Paris last April. Her words were simple. "We are not looking for a vanished monument. We are looking for a monument that modern Alexandria has entombed." To find it now would take millions of dollars. Buying up land, digging deep shafts, draining groundwater, just to uncover stonework that may not even carry Alexander's name anymore. The mystery deepens when you realize something even stranger. Alexander's tomb didn't just vanish. It was never meant to be in Alexandria in the first place. Alexander's death and the stolen tomb. Alexander the Great's final chapter began on a hot night in Babylon in June of 323 BCE. He was only 32, but after 12 straight years of brutal military campaigns, non-stop marching, and old battle injuries, his body was worn down. That summer, something hit him hard. He developed a high fever, terrible stomach pain, and slowly lost his ability to move and speak. His generals stood by, waiting for instructions. But before any of them could agree on who should lead next, Alexander was gone. Today, doctors looking back at old records believe it was likely a deadly intestinal infection, like typhoid or a deadly form of malaria. A 2022 review in Historical Perspectives in Medicine points out that his symptoms actually match those diseases much better than the old poisoning rumors ever did. But the only official note we have from the court says, "At sunset, the king was speechless." Long before his death, Alexander had already made plans for where he wanted to be buried. After his famous journey across the desert to the Siwa oasis, the oracle of Zeus, Amun, declared him a divine son. Alexander believed it completely. He decided his tomb should be built right beside that oracle's sandstone temple, a place where both Egyptians and Greeks worshipped the same god, just under different names. But his sudden death threw everything into chaos. His wife Roxane was pregnant. His half-brother Aridaeus had serious mental issues, and no one around him had the authority to make sure his burial wishes were actually followed. That left a power vacuum, and Perdiccas, the army's top general, stepped in. He ordered a huge funeral cart to be built, something so grand it would send a message that the empire was still intact. The historian Diodorus Siculus described it as a 40-foot-long wooden structure covered in gold plates, held together with emerald-tipped nails and topped with a roof shaped like a temple. It was covered in purple silk and glittered under the sun. It was so massive that it took 64 mules just to move it. The funeral convoy left Babylon toward the end of the dry season in 322 BCE, inching forward at barely 2 miles per hour. But the body wasn't just being transported, it was a symbol. Whoever reached the final destination with Alexander's remains could claim to be his true heir. But the convoy didn't go where it was supposed to. It never even reached Macedonia. A 2024 Cambridge commentary on newly studied fragments from the royal diaries shows that something strange happened. Travel logs suddenly jump from the region of Cilicia to a site near Damascus. That detour made no sense if the plan was to go north. But it makes perfect sense when you learn that Ptolemy, one of Alexander's closest generals and then governor of Egypt, had a plan. He was waiting at the port of Dor with soldiers and ships. He convinced the funeral escort to change course. What looked like a military honor guard was actually a hijacking. That single move triggered the first of the wars of the Diadochi, as Alexander's former generals fought for control of his empire. But Ptolemy's gamble worked. By rerouting the Golden Hearse south through Gaza and then up the Nile to Memphis, he made himself look like the guardian Alexander had chosen. Just 10 years later, records in Alexandria were already calling him Soter, or Savior. Before long, the body and the gold sarcophagus was moved once again, this time to Alexandria, into the new royal tomb known as the Soma. That shrine became something the other successors could never match. Meanwhile, the temple at Siwa was left behind. The structure still shows signs that a tomb had been planned there. The stone platform has markings where construction began but was never finished. A narrow hallway behind the sanctuary points into the ground, but it's never been fully explored. Since 2023, Egypt's National Authority for Remote Sensing and Space Sciences has been using drone-mounted LiDAR to scan the area. In February of 2025, their lead scientist, Iman Ghonim, revealed that they had detected 2 hidden chambers about 30 feet below the surface, one circular, one rectangular, and both lined up with the original ceremonial path. Centuries later, the power struggles are gone, but the search continues as archaeologists dig beneath streets and hills to find what history tried to hide. The search for Alexander's tomb. 15 digging seasons in Alexandria's Shalalat Gardens have transformed a quiet city park into a maze of wooden walkways and buzzing water pumps. It's all under the careful lead of Greek archaeologist Calliope Limnaeos Papakosta. She first started this dig in 2009 using just a handheld soil scanner. Today, her team runs low-voltage electrical pulses into the earth and feeds the signals into a truck-mounted muon tomography rig. Together, these tools create faint images of what's buried below. Walls, empty chambers, passageways, about 20 feet beneath the current streets. These depths match the layout of Alexandria's royal quarter during the Hellenistic period. Then, in March of 2024, one of those strange underground shapes finally paid off. A headless marble statue was pulled from a trench barely wide enough for a doorway. The figure had a heroic stance, its shoulder drapery pinned, with classic Alexander-style hair flowing across the forehead. Both Greek City Times and Newsweek reported on the find, quoting Papakosta's quiet hope that the statue's missing hand once gripped a spear. Just a month later, 3 pink granite column drums appeared along the same trench. Their size and layout matched the dimensions of the stoa believed to surround Alexander's public mausoleum. That hints at something monumental buried under today's Nabi Daniel Street traffic. Excavation isn't easy. Wet sand and modern apartment buildings limit how deep the team can dig. But they've already uncovered a drainage tunnel paved with basalt, a ceremonial pool lined with green schist imported from Aswan, and the remains of an arcade that now sits 1 full story below the water table. Every discovery adds to a growing theory that Alexander's tomb, or at least a hero shrine built in his honor, might still lie beneath these trees. Still, no sarcophagus has been found. Papakosta warns that bulldozers might have destroyed the key site long ago. But in her 2024 report to the Hellenic Research Institute, she makes one thing clear. There's still a strong signal from a large vaulted chamber underground. The only challenge now is how to reach it without collapsing nearby buildings. While Papakosta's team digs under the Egyptian coast, the other major front in the search is happening about 900 miles northwest, at the Kasta Mound in Amphipolis, Greece. This enormous burial site was uncovered in 2012. The entire mound is surrounded by a marble wall over 1,600 feet in length, something unmatched in any other burial site from the late 4th century BCE. At the entrance, visitors are greeted by worn-down Sphinx statues. Inside, there's a passage between two 6-foot-tall stone maidens with sandaled feet. A detailed mosaic on the floor shows Persephone being abducted, a symbol tied to death and rebirth. When excavators finally reached the central pit in 2015, they found bones from 5 people: an older woman, 2 adult men, an infant, and a cremated person whose sex couldn't be confirmed. One of the men had sword injuries to the ribs, suggesting violence, possibly tied to political struggles. The big mystery was whether any of these people were directly related to Alexander. In January 2024, the Journal of Archaeological Science Reports published a study analyzing ancient DNA from the bones and teeth. None of the individuals shared maternal DNA with Philip II, Aridaeus, or Alexander IV, figures confirmed to be buried at Vergina. This makes it unlikely that the Amphipolis mound was a royal family tomb. Instead, a growing theory, supported by a May 2025 Nexus Network journal paper, is that Alexander himself may have built the tomb as a tribute to his closest companion, Hephaestion. Laser scans of the site reveal that the burial chamber aligns perfectly with the first beam of sunlight on the winter solstice, a design tied to sun symbolism that Alexander adopted after visiting the oracle at Siwa. This focus on cosmic alignment ties into what's been found in Alexandria too. Both sites, Amphipolis and Alexandria, point to a ruler who carefully blended religion, theater, and politics. He created places that were not just graves but statements about legacy and light. Yet the problem remains. None of these graves contain Alexander's body. Even at Vergina, where a 2025 review used X-rays, bone studies, and wound analysis to confirm the royal burials, the pattern holds. Tomb 1 holds Philip II. Tomb 2 holds Aridaeus. Tomb 3 holds the young Alexander IV. Alexander the Great is still missing. The silence is getting louder. In Egypt, Papacosta's scans point to a hidden chamber below, thick, layers of post-war concrete. In Greece, the Amphipolis team keeps uncovering new artifacts, only to find that none belong to Alexander. Both digs use cutting-edge tools, resistivity scanners, muon detectors, digital modeling, solar alignment simulations, but both run into the same wall. The one man they're all hoping to find has left no confirmed trace. At a 2025 lecture in Alexandria's famous library, Papacosta showed satellite images of both sites, one dot glowing on the Egyptian coast, the other in northern Greece. "We are digging mirror images," she said. One city buried its history under concrete and seawater. The other covered its secrets with marble. And in the middle is a question that no technology has answered. Until that chamber in Alexandria opens, or until someone finds a nameplate hidden inside the Greek tomb, the mystery stays split between 2 countries and 2 teams using every tool they have. But even with every scan, trench, and breakthrough, one question refuses to stay buried. What happens if they actually find him? The global impact of uncovering Alexander's tomb. If Alexander the Great's tomb were ever found and confirmed, it wouldn't just update a few history books. It would completely change how we understand the ancient world. This isn't just about a man who died more than 2,000 years ago. It's about what his final resting place could reveal. How he was buried, how people honored him, and what kinds of rituals surrounded someone seen as both a man and a god by different empires. Alexander died in 323 BCE after building an empire that stretched from Greece to India. But what came next wasn't just the collapse of that empire, it was the start of a mystery that's lasted for centuries. His missing tomb left such a huge gap in history that finding it today wouldn't just answer a few questions, it might reshape everything we know about the Hellenistic world. Historians would finally have real evidence to replace centuries of speculation. But this isn't just a historian's dream. Alexander's legacy still holds weight in today's world. Greece, North Macedonia, Egypt, and even Iran all claim some part of his story. He's seen as a national hero, a symbol of power, even a cultural weapon. Military schools study his tactics. His face still shows up in statues, textbooks, and political messaging. If someone were to find his tomb and prove it, the argument over who owns that discovery would be fierce and deeply personal for many nations. Then there's the religious